All right, so let's not keep you waiting. Moving on to our keynote speaker for tonight, and to officially start the first session of empowering volunteers, allow me to introduce Josh. Has a combined 20 years of extensive professional experience in the fields of broadcasting and journalism, the academe, corporate communications and human resources, organizational development and talent management, and the performing arts. He currently acts as Lexmark's training and organizational development consultant. In his current function in the organization, he has the opportunity to empower the organization and facilitate transformation through innovative development solutions. This is not limited to just skills or leadership trainings. This includes helping build the culture of teams, restructuring groups, assessing employees and leaders, and giving recommendations on their development, to name a few. Prior to joining Lexmark, he ventured into the corporate communications space. He was once connected with AG's People Support, a multinational BPO, and the Islands Group, a local tourism brand. His main responsibility was to provide a uniform messaging within and outside the organization, with the end goal of establishing a culture of engagement from all of the stakeholders. This also includes driving activities that aim to give back to the community as an individual and as a collective entity through the different corporate social responsibility initiatives. He is proud of the different CSR initiatives that he championed, such as the Better English, Better Future program, directed to reinforce the English curriculum of grade 1 students in Lahog Elementary School. He also spearheaded the Handful of Hope initiative in cooperation with the Rotaract Club of Cebu South, wherein the program won as the best community-based program in 2012. He also acted as one of the official spokesperson of BangonSugBohol, the civic movement aimed at helping Cebu and Bohol rise from the rubble of the October 15, 2013 earthquake. Related to this, he once worked as the chief journalist of a daily newspaper in Cagayan de Oro City, covering the City Hall, Capitol, business, and life and leisure beats. He covered and headlined stories of the important events in his hometown, such as the ousting of the provincial governor in the early 2000s, the graft and corruption charges of the then mayor Vicente Emano, to name a few. He also worked as a teacher for 6 years and acted as a moderator of the school's official newsletter, where he had the chance to train and coach aspiring writers and journalists in national competitions such as the annual school's press conference. But above all, Josh admits that his heart belongs to the arts. He is a playwright and wrote the Cebuano original stage plays entitled Si Chris, Si Claire, og Mercy, and Tulo ka adlaw una mag 50 ka tuig. His original one-act play entitled Pit Senyor kay Mercy Kini was shot into a short film and won as the second best picture during the 2018 Sinulog Short Film Festival. It was also one of Cebu's official entry to the 2018 Cinema Region and Pluma de Paz. He also bagged the Best Story category in the 2008 Sinulog Short Film Festival. Currently, he is a resident actor of OurHouse, a local theater and entertainment brand. He also appeared in short films and commercials such as The Descent, Leyenda, and Titay. During his spare time, he loves to watch, record podcasts, and write stories. Ladies and gentlemen, to jumpstart this session for empowering volunteers entitled Emotional Intelligence and Leadership, we give you Josh Eballe.
All right, good evening, everyone. I hope you guys can hear me. Is my audio okay? Am I audible to everybody? Perfect. All right. So, James, thank you so much for that very generous introduction. Thank you for being so comprehensive with the introduction. I really appreciate it. But before anything else, JCs, before we move forward with our conversation this evening, let me just again extend my sincerest thanks to all of you for inviting me this evening and for giving me this opportunity to share with you guys what I know about emotional intelligence and leadership. And to be honest with you, I prepared a series of PowerPoint presentation for our discussion this evening, but in the interest of time, I will try to wing our conversation tonight, but rest assured that by the end of our conversation this evening, it is my desire that you will capture new insights that you guys cannot just use in your volunteerism, but insights also that you can use in your day to day. All right, and I'll also do my best to make our learning session or our training this evening interactive. Okay, which means also that most of our interaction is going to happen in our chat box. So later as well, if you guys have questions, for example, or some clarification about our topic, please feel free to type it down in our chat box. And I would like to ask the assistance of Jinx to perhaps collate the questions, and we can discuss those questions before we end our session this evening. All right. I hope everybody is fine this evening. And just to again jumpstart our discussion, guys, can you please type the letters EQ in our chat box? And I just would like to see if everybody is pumped up and ready with our session this evening. Perfect. All right. You guys are so responsive. And while you guys are doing that, let me just also share my slides. All right. And hopefully you guys are able to see my PowerPoint presentation. I'm also looking at our broadcast over Facebook. So I'm also getting some real-time updates over Facebook. Okay, perfect. So while I was listening to Director Daryl actually earlier, that was indeed a very inspiring message, Director. I really appreciate that. And if there's one thing that I share with you, Director Daryl, it is when you mentioned that, and I wrote it down actually, and let me read it because I don't want to misquote you. It is when you mentioned that leadership is all about making you feel safe. And that resonated to me very well because leadership is really all about that. And when we speak about making you feel safe, it's not just in the context of the physical safety, right? But safety, which also includes the psychological safety, wherein in an organization, say for example in JCs or in your workplace or within your clique or in your schools, you are able to speak up, right? You're able to contribute your thoughts, your ideas, your recommendations without the fear of being humiliated or without the fear of being judged just because you raised that point or you raised that concern. That is a very safe environment. And that's exactly the reason why I also resonated to that statement by Director Daryl. And thank you for saying that one, Daryl, because that message will also resonate in our discussion this evening. All right. So in the next few minutes or so, friends, our discussion with this evening will focus on number one, of course, we'll be talking about what really is emotional intelligence. And that's that's the reason as to why you guys invited me this evening. All right. So I will do my best, okay, to break down the concept of EQ to everybody. And of course, I also do my best to connect the concept of emotional intelligence towards leadership, towards your volunteer efforts and your volunteer work, because technically there is really a strong connection between EQ and leadership. And before we end with our learning session or our conversation this evening, we'll also discuss some tips and strategies on how to strengthen one's EQ. So I suppose, you know, uh, the last 15 minutes or 20 minutes of my time is going to be jam-packed. And again, I will do my best to make it as interactive for everybody. And that being said, all right, let's use the chat box, guys. And I just would like to know and hear how you assess yourself in terms of how well you manage your emotions. So using our chat box, friends, can you please type down your self-assessment in relation to how you manage your emotions in different situations, all right? And let me just check our chat box right now. So we have responses such as a 6, a 9, a 4, an 8, a 6, a 7. And just keep them coming, guys. All right. So what I'm seeing is that it's not perfect, right? Nobody said that it's a 10, okay? And there's nothing wrong, all right? There's nothing wrong if you are going to assess or evaluate yourself with a 10, okay? But from what I'm seeing from our chat box, it sends me a message, all right, that most, if not all of us, do have some areas to improve in relation to our emotional intelligence, okay? And it is my desire again that our session this evening, sorry, our session this evening will give you some value add, most especially on how you can further develop your emotional intelligence. Hopefully also, guys, no, if you have rated yourself, say for example, a 6, hopefully after the session, it will become a 7. Or if you rated yourself a 5, hopefully it will become a 6. Again, my desire is that there will be at least a change after our discussion this evening. Again, thank you so much for responding in our chat box. Okay, so I suppose the best way to start and begin understanding what emotional intelligence is to go back a little bit, all right, to its genesis. So if you guys can indulge me a little bit, all right, let me be a little bit academic. This will just be quick, and I hope I'm not going to bore you, okay? But this is just so important so that we will have a more informed understanding on how EQ began, okay? So before the idea of emotional intelligence became popular, there's actually just one way to identify if a person is intelligent. And I'm sure you guys are very familiar with this. And it is through our IQ, right? Or our intelligence quotient. And our IQ, as we defined it, is a score derived from a standardized tests designed to measure our intelligence, okay? And when we speak about IQ, there are two important elements that's being measured in IQ, and that is your verbal linguistic intelligence and your logical or mathematical intelligence. And again, when we speak about verbal linguistic intelligence, people who are very strong in this intelligence are those individuals who are able to use and articulate All right. I'm not sure if you guys can hear me now. Please do let me know. Okay. Thank you. All right, perfect. So hopefully you guys were still able to capture some of those parts that I mentioned about the beginnings of EQ, all right? But just so quickly, let me just reiterate myself that IQ is being measured in two important elements, and that is your verbal linguistic intelligence and your logical mathematical intelligence. And for individuals who are very strong in verbal linguistic, like what I mentioned earlier, they are able to use words very well, both in writing and in speaking. And they are the individuals who are typically very good in writing, in sharing information, all right? And I'm sure you know people as well who are able to explain something in a very digestible manner. Do you guys follow? I'm sure that you know some individuals who are able to explain concepts in such a way that they make it so simple and easier to understand. And if you've encountered people whose capability is like that, they are those individuals who are gifted with verbal linguistic intelligence. All right. On the other hand, your logical mathematical intelligence are those individuals, all right, who are very good in recognizing patterns, analyzing problems, and they're also very good in solving complex computations. Okay. There are also those individuals who are very good in making sense from abstract questions and patterns. Which is why, guys, if you can remember, especially for those folks who graduated already in college, all right, when you would apply in a university, they would ask you to answer these sets of questions, right? If it's verbal linguistic, it has something to do with, again, the sequencing of stories, subject-verb agreement, what else? Comprehension. And for logical mathematical, of course, you have your computations and you have your abstract questions. Which means to say, friends, all right, that the old concept of intelligence tells us, all right, the old mindset or the old concept of intelligence tells us that if you scored low in your verbal linguistic or logical mathematical assessments, you can be considered as slow, all right, in the standards of IQ, all right? Or if you scored in the assessments, you could also be considered as a person who is not proficient with your mental abilities. All right. But thankfully, okay. But thankfully, in 1975, there is this behaviorist by the name of Howard Gardner. All right, who introduced the concept of multiple intelligence. And according to Howard Gardner, and he published this one as his findings, that aside from the logical, mathematical, or verbal linguistic intelligence, there are other 6 forms of intelligences. And he calls this one as your 8 multiple intelligence. And I'm sure that you guys are familiar with Gardner's MIs, right? Or at least have heard about multiple intelligence. So aside from logical and mathematical, Howard Gardner said that there are some individuals who are musically intelligent, okay? Apparently, this is not me, friends, all right? I don't belong to the musically intelligent group. The musically intelligent individuals are those people who are able to make sense out of rhythms, patterns, and notes, even if they haven't studied it, all right, or even if they haven't really had a formal training about it. Okay. And yes, you guys are correct. It's a famous theory of learning, and I also agree with JCI Panitan, all right, that thank God for Howard's 8 multiple intelligence. Aside from musical intelligence, Howard Gardner also said that there are some individuals who are so good at body movements, performing actions, and physical control. And this is your bodily kinesthetic. And they are actually your dancers, your athletes, or those individuals who are very good in psychomotor activities. Okay? Aside from your bodily kinesthetic, you also have your spatial intelligence. And they are the individuals who are very strong, all right, in visualizing ideas. But aside from visualizing ideas, they are able to put it into a tangible output. They are your architects, your engineers, your bakers. Do you guys follow? They have this vision, they have this idea in their head, and they are able to replicate it into a 3D. That's what we call a spatial. We also have the naturalistic intelligence, and from the word itself, they are the individuals who are very in tune to nature. Sometimes we wonder, right, that there are some farmers who don't have that formal education, but they know which crops to plant. They know the tides of the weather, and they know the impact of that in their farming, for example. These are individuals who are very strong in their naturalistic intelligence. And finally, all right, the last two intelligence that I'm going to share with you guys is where the idea of EQ was anchored from. And this is your intrapersonal intelligence and your interpersonal intelligence. Okay? And when we speak about intrapersonal intelligence, these are the individuals who are very strong in becoming so aware about their own emotions and their motivations. And the interpersonal, from the word inter, right? They are the individuals who are very good at understanding and interacting with other people. These are individuals who are very strong in building connections. All right? Now, you might be asking right now, what is the importance of knowing the origin of emotional intelligence? Again, like what I mentioned earlier, it's a very important discussion because it gives us a fresh perspective that intelligence is not always all about how smart you are in solving equations or articulating sentences. And kindly type in our chat box if you guys agree to that statement. Again, that when we speak about intelligence, it's not always about how smart you are in solving equations or articulating your sentences. In this concept by Howard Gardner about the multiple intelligence, it gives us a perspective, right? That every individual is actually unique and intelligent. Sorry. Every individual is unique and intelligent. And I'm so happy that Director Daryl mentioned earlier about Daniel Goleman, because Daniel Goleman is the father of emotional intelligence. And he was the one who made further study from Gardner's intrapersonal and interpersonal intelligences. And if there's one thing also that I would like you friends to take as a major takeaway from our discussion this evening, and let me just look into my time if I'm still within my schedule, all right? And Jinx and Jurex, just also let me know and chat me if I have already consumed my time for my session today, all right? Because I also don't want to extend too much because we have a total of 263 or 64 participants this evening. All right, so going back, okay? If there's one important takeaway that I would like you guys to have from our discussion this evening, it is this statement from Daniel Goleman. And it is when he said that IQ is the best predictor of academic success, but EQ is the best predictor for life success. And I just would like you guys to, I just would like to give you guys a little bit of time to read that statement again and really internalize it and try to understand what Daniel Goleman is trying to point out in this quote, right? that IQ is the best predictor of academic success, and EQ is the best predictor for life success. And I'm seeing a lot of affirmations and confirmations in our chat box. And thank you guys for agreeing with that. But I have a caveat, okay? And let me just also clarify myself, okay? Because I don't want you guys to get me wrong. I don't want you guys to get the idea, all right, that IQ is not important, okay? That's not the point that I'm trying to establish in this conversation, all right? Because first and foremost, IQ is very important. And just like what Daniel Goleman said in this quote, right, that it is the predictor of academic success. It is even the best predictor in your corporate success. And what do I exactly mean by that one? In the corporate world, for example, friends, or not just in the corporate world, in JCI, for example, or any organizations that you belong to, I mean, IQ, all right, remains as the best predictor of which level of job you can hold. All right? Like say, for example, for the professions like in medicine or in teaching, accounting, engineering, for example, or real estate, etc., you actually need to have a high IQ to do the job. Do you guys follow? But here's the interesting part. But once you are in the position already, like say, for example, you got hired, okay? You got hired already as a doctor, as an engineer, as a teacher. Once you are in that position already, IQ does not guarantee that you will be outstanding in your performance, nor IQ will give you that guarantee that you will emerge as a leader. All right? Because IQ no longer predicts success once you are on the job, because listen to this, all right? Because everybody within your circle, may it be in your workplace or in JCs, in your school, or any organization, all right? You are already competing and dealing with these groups of individuals who could be as smart as you, or if not smarter than you. Would you guys agree? Right? That there is really the possibility wherein when you are in that position already, again, may it be in the workplace or again in any organization, na you're not the most intelligent person anymore, because there are also other people whose IQ is higher than yours. But interestingly, all right, this is where emotional intelligence adds its value, all right? And let me also say this one, because I don't want to forget this. This is also very true when you are in organizations, right? May it be with JCI or outside JCI. I mean, you will be dealing with and collaborating with a diverse group of people coming from different backgrounds, professions, upbringing, or even generations, right? From generation X, Y, and Z. And these groups of people also operates in different behaviors. Would you guys agree? So the question now is, are you able to connect with other people? Are you able to manage conflicts, for example, within your group or within your peers? Are you able to successfully manage stress and problems, say, for example, in your workplace or in the organization without snapping out, for example? Or are you able to build genuine relationships with other people? Because again, that's where the conversation of emotional intelligence would revolve on, all right? And There's one comment from our chat box. If you compare yourself with others, you may become vain or bitter. For always there will be greater and lesser persons than yourself. And I totally agree. All right. I totally agree. And that's also where, again, emotional intelligence would come in, because emotional intelligence has a lot to do with self-awareness as well. All right. Emotional intelligence has a great deal in terms of how you know yourself very well. And if you're going to ask me, self-awareness is the most fundamental exercise that everybody or all of us should go through if we want to strengthen or if we want to improve our emotional intelligence. And speaking about self-awareness, all right? Speaking about self-awareness, I just have a very quick introspection activity, all right? I just have a very quick introspection activity. And I call this activity as what makes you, all right? And you don't have to type your answer in our chat box, but I need you guys to answer this question in your head, all right? So my first question is, what makes you angry? Or meaning to say, what are those instances that would trigger this specific emotion, like anger, all right? And again, you didn't have to type it in our chat box. You can answer this one in your head. And if you guys are going to ask me what makes me angry, one of my triggers is when people cut, whenever people cut in line. All right, kani makasingit, guys. That's one of my triggers. All right. So hopefully you have you have that answer in your head. Okay, on what makes you angry. Now my next question is, how is it manifested? How is that anger manifested? Okay, when your emotional triggers are switched on. So say for example, like from my end, when people cut in line, it's manifested through physiologically, meaning to say bodily, my face turns red. All right, my face turns red. I would tend to stutter. All right, and I become confrontational at times. That's how it is manifested. All right, that's how my anger is manifested. All right, and this is a very important exercise, guys. Okay, and you might be asking, Josh, can I ask this question using other emotions, such as what makes me happy, what makes me sad, or what makes me scared? Definitely. All right, definitely. I just used the emotion, which is anger, because anger, believe it or not, guys, excuse me, is the easiest emotion to manage. And that may sound shocking to you guys, right? Because for a lot of people, they believe that anger is the most difficult emotion to manage. It's actually not, right? The most difficult emotion to manage is joy or happiness. Now, I'll give you a very quick reason as to why it's like that. Anger is the easiest emotion to manage because it's so easy to identify what would cause it. And because it's so easy to identify what triggers your anger, it's easier to manage it. Joy and happiness is more difficult to manage because in reality, if I'm going to ask you guys the question, what makes you happy? The response may not be that instantaneous compared to the question earlier, which is what makes you angry. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense, guys, no? So the easier it is for you to identify the triggers of the emotion, the easier for you to manage it, which is why anger is the easiest emotion to manage. But for the sake of our discussion this evening, allow me to use anger as an example. Now, you might be wondering why we are doing this exercise, because I would like to drive a point, guys, most especially, again, since our discussion is all about EQ, all right? That in order for us to develop high emotional intelligence, let's just all remember this very straightforward formula. All right? That EQ is tantamount to or equal to awareness, understanding, and management. All right? And let me spend my last 5 minutes discussing this one because it's already 8:33, and I hope you guys are still there, right? And I hope you guys are okay that I went on overtime. But let me just spend a couple of minutes discussing this formula. So awareness is really all about our ability to recognize the different situations or circumstances that would make you feel a certain emotion. All right. Thanks, guys. All right. Okay. So going back, awareness again is all about being able to recognize your triggers. And if you can still remember our activity earlier, right? The what makes you angry. That is an activity that is focused on awareness because it allows you to actually recognize your triggers. I hope that makes sense, friends, no? But from my end, for example, what makes me angry is when people cut in line. I recognize that, okay? That's one of my triggers. Another triggers of my anger, all right, when people would come in late. Like say, for example, amongst our group of friends, or even, or in even, say, for example, in my trainings or in my classes, um, uh, the trigger of my anger is usually when people don't respect my time. And that's also the reason why I get so particular with time, because that's also one of my triggers, all right? So that's awareness. And that's the first step. And that's the reason why I mentioned earlier that self-awareness is very important, right? Because recognition is very important. Now, understanding is our ability to actually identify and describe, all right, the emotion that you are feeling, most especially the physiological, mental, or the behavioral impact of that emotion. All right? And just like what we mentioned earlier, that when, say, for example, my anger is triggered just because somebody cut in line, my face turns red. My heart tends to beat so fast. I would stutter because I would become confrontational. Okay? I have the tendency to become confrontational because that's my trigger. I should be able to describe, okay, the impact of that trigger to myself. And you guys might be asking, why is that important, Josh? Because that's where management would come in. Because when you speak about emotional intelligence, guys, it's not really the emotion that we are managing or controlling or addressing. Emotional intelligence is really all about your ability to manage or address the reactions or the actions caused by the emotion. And I hope you guys were able to capture that, all right? Because the very common misconception of people about EQ, all right, is that they think EQ is your ability to control your emotions. EQ is your ability to suppress the emotions, but it is not. EQ is your ability to acknowledge that emotion. I am angry at this point, as an example. And my anger is manifested. All right? My anger is manifested by me becoming confrontational. And because I am aware that this is how my emotions are manifested, I am able to manage or address the reactions or the actions that comes with the emotion. Does that make sense, guys? I hope that makes sense, all right? And that's a very important point to drive at, because I also would like to drive a point that all emotions are actually valid, but not all actions are. All emotions are actually valid, but not all actions are. All right? That's the reason why if you are really going to study emotional intelligence, we often say that it's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel angry. It's okay to feel sad. What is not okay is when those reactions or the action that goes along with the emotions would become harmful, not just to yourself, all right, but to other people as well. Okay, so hopefully, again, this will be one of your major takeaways from our discussion this evening. All right, and let me just quickly proceed to the last part of my discussion, guys, because I promised you earlier, right, that I'm going to talk about some tips and strategies on how you can strengthen your emotional intelligence. And please do give me a couple of minutes as I um, move my slides. All right. Okay. So how can we strengthen our emotional intelligence? All right. One of the things that I can recommend to everybody is that you have to will it. All right, recognize that you've got something to do with it. And I'm very happy that RS opened our session this evening with a mindfulness exercise, because mindfulness is a very effective tool to actually center ourselves and be more aware about what we need to improve, most especially in our emotional intelligence journey, right? One of the very fundamental actions that we can do if we want to strengthen our EQ is to acknowledge, all right? Is to acknowledge that we need to improve it. That there's something that we can do in order for us to harness our emotional intelligence. Because again, I also know some people um, who do not acknowledge the fact that they can still be better. All right. So by accepting, all right, by accepting that, and that's also one of the important points that I would like to drive at, okay? Because when we speak about leadership, and Director Daryl is very correct earlier, no, na leadership starts at home, all right? Because leadership starts with ourselves. I strongly believe that if you can't lead yourself, then you don't have any business leading other people. Do you guys agree? If you can't lead yourself, and we call that one as personal leadership, if you can't lead yourself, then you don't have any business leading other people. Which is why it's very important that in your journey towards emotional intelligence, you have to recognize that you can do something to improve it. And this could be the most challenging part, all right? Because individuals or people are not hardwired, no? Our brains are not hardwired to accept some failures, because our brains are hardwired to accept just compliments. Our brain are hardwired to accept just those beautiful words. But in our quest towards emotional intelligence, there are really those instances wherein we need to hear those genuine and authentic feedback about how we are behaving, about how we are reacting. And that's actually part of the process. All right. So it starts with you. All right. It starts with you. Recognize that you've got something to do with it. And Another recommendation that I can share to you guys is to channel your emotional energy into an appropriate and healthy response. I mentioned earlier, right, that when we speak about emotional intelligence, it's not really all about your ability to control your emotion, because EQ is not all about controlling your emotion. EQ is all about your ability to manage the reactions that comes with your emotion. So whenever you guys would feel, all right, that your emotional triggers are switched on, and perhaps this could be my assignment to everybody, try to look for or try to identify some activities, all right? Some activities that you can do. And these activities, guys, should be productive and healthy activities wherein you can channel that emotional energy, all right? And just so quickly, some people would say that, Josh, the activity that I am thinking of to channel my emotional energy is by, let's just say, all right, for the sake of discussion, I would channel my emotional energy. Let's just say I'm so stressed, okay? I'm stressed because of the deadlines, the meetings, the school requirements, for example. I channel my stress by eating, by ordering milk tea, for example, or ranting on Facebook, all right? Which I do not recommend, because the activity that I recommend, just like what I mentioned earlier, are those productive and healthy responses, all right? Because say, for example, if your activity to channel your emotional energy is via, say, for example, eating desserts or ordering milk tea, all right, it will also have an impact in your body and in your health, okay? And our body is our number one tool, all right, if we want to improve our emotional energy or our emotional intelligence, sorry. Because if we are sickly, all right, if we are sickly, then definitely, all right, common sense tells us that we are going to take good care of our physical body first, right, before our emotional health or our emotional intelligence. So it's important that we take good care of our body first. I really admire this very powerful quote from my favorite author, Brene Brown, and I'm sure for some of you, you are familiar with her. It is when she said that our body keeps scores and it always wins. And for me, that's a very powerful quote because it's really true, right? The activities, the abuses, for example, or those unmindful activities that we will do to our body, there will come a time, all right? There will come a time that, our body will keep score, and in the end, our body always wins, okay? So channel your energy into something that's productive and healthy. And what are those examples? Some of which are reflected in this specific screen, all right? I don't have to read it one by one. You guys can take a screenshot of this slide. RS also introduced to us mindfulness, and that's a very powerful exercise. I also do my mindfulness activity, RS, every morning, just before I go into my morning prayer. And it helps me ever since. It keeps me centered, it keeps me grounded. For some people, all right, they channel their negative emotions through physical activities. They run, they bike, they walk, okay? For other people also, they channel it by listening to uplifting music. Others would draw. Others would write it in a journal. Different strokes for different folks. My point really is that search or identify that activity that is both productive and healthy. All right? And the reason why I'm really emphasizing this one, friends, because I also would like to drive a point that your diet is not only what you eat, it is what you watch, it is what you listen to, and it is what you read and the people you hang around. So be mindful of the things that you put into your body, emotionally, spiritually, and physically. All right? And for some people, they say the traveling, definitely. But given our restrictions today, right, wherein travel is a little bit difficult, it's doable, but it's a little bit difficult, but it's still a good way to release those negative emotions, right? Stress drinking. I think everything is okay for as long as it's in moderation, right? But again, like what I mentioned, if these activities that you're doing, guys, would impact your physical health will also impact your emotional health. Okay? And that's the reason why I really highlighted that diet is not just really all about what you eat, but it's an overall perspective. Okay? It's an overall perspective about things. All right. What else? How can we strengthen our EQ? And this may sound so academic, guys, right? I'm very sure you've heard about this a lot of times, like pause, breathe, all right? And you guys might be thinking, is there a scientific explanation as to why we are pausing and breathing if we encounter stressful or negative emotions? There's actually a scientific explanation to that, guys, all right? And if I can be academic for a little bit, all right? Our brain, all right? And you know that our brain is divided into our left brain and our right brain. Our left brain, all right, is, or this is the biggest part of our brain. And this is where our logic, our reason, our decision making is found or housed. Our right brain is the part of our brain which is the creative, and this is where our emotions are found. Okay, now this is the interesting part of it. Whenever we are confronted with a stressful situation or a difficult situation, whatever that is, may it be in the workplace or in your organization, whenever we are confronted with a difficult situation, our left brain, which is the biggest part of our brain, responsible for logic, decision making, and problem solving, shuts down. It shuts down. In psychology, we call this one as hijacked. Okay, your left brain was hijacked. But interestingly, guys, your right brain, which houses your emotions, is 100% open. It's functioning. And that's the exact reason also why people tell you not to make any decisions when you are at the height of your emotion, because you know why? It is only your right brain that is open. It is your right brain that is open, which is why people would say breathe, right? Breathe deeply, because the scientific explanation of that is that we want that oxygen to circulate back in our left brain, thus slowly opening up our left brain. And every time we deep breathe, our left brain also slowly functions. Does that make sense, guys? I hope that makes sense, all right? Because that's very important. And this is where the critical space would come in, all right? And what is that critical space? That critical space, guys, is that very tiny space, okay, between your stimulus and your response. What do I exactly mean by that? Think about those instances, guys, all right, wherein, say, for example, you are in a difficult situation. Let's just say, all right, let's just say you are walking, say, for example, in the mall or in the street, and then somebody intentionally, all right, somebody intentionally bumped you for no apparent reason. That's the stimuli, right? That's the stimuli. The critical space I'm talking about is that space in our brain that is responsible for decision making, that tells us on how we are going to respond to that specific stimuli. And sometimes that happens so quick. Do you guys follow? The critical space sometimes happens so quick, which is why it is an important exercise for us to actually pause and breathe before we react to some things, because we are also exercising our critical space. All right. And just a very quick, again, question and reflection related to the critical space. I'm sure, most, if not all of us, have overreacted in the heat of the moment. Say, for example, we've said or done something that we've almost regretted once we realized after the fact. My question is, how did that experience go for you? What was the impact of that experience to yourself or to your relationships? And looking back, because hindsight is 2020, what would have you done differently? If only you have really thought about how you're going to respond to the situation, what do you think could have been the result? And again, the response is very dependent on that critical space that I'm talking about. And Viktor Frankl, again, one of one of the most famous behaviorists, he said that increasing our critical space is about empowering ourselves to tune into our emotional sensation, pause, and be able to think and choose the best words or actions for a given situation. And then lastly, guys, all right? And then lastly, if we really want to strengthen our emotional intelligence, I highly recommend that you look for a mentor, all right? And it is also my desire that your mentor is somebody whose EQ is also high, all right? Because it's important that you talk with people who don't gossip and who don't reinforce the idea that you are a victim. It's important to talk to people who are interested in understanding what you can do with what you are currently feeling right now. It's very difficult to talk to people who would reinforce that you are a victim. And what do I exactly mean by that one? Say, for example, you open to somebody and you open to, for example, a friend, and you tell that person that this is the current situation that you are going through. And that friend will tell you na wala ka nang magagawa dyan, for example, right? Or too bad, you're in that situation. Or if I'm in that situation, I think I'm not going to survive. If the conversation is like that, then I think you need to rethink who the people, you need to rethink the group of people that you are going to share, say, for example, your experiences. Because again, we don't need individuals who would reinforce the idea that you can't do anything about it. People with high EQ will provide you with that direction, or sometimes would even challenge you, your thinking, your mindset, that there is something that you can do about it in the current situation that you are in right now. All right. And again, guys, it's very important that the mentor that you are going to talk to or look for, I'm very sure in JCs, there are a lot of leaders. All right. There are a lot of leaders in your group that can provide that objective mentorship. All right. And I also, enjoin the leaders of JCs to also, just like what Daryl mentioned earlier, to provide that safe space for everybody. All right. Because it's very important to also realize that if we want our volunteers or our members to really be part, be engaged, and collaborate in the entire process, it's important that we provide that safe space and safe environment for everybody. All right. And that being said, I just would like to tell everybody that strengthening your emotional intelligence does not happen overnight. So you've got to start now. All right. And I hope our conversation this evening, guys, has been helpful to everybody. I hope that it added some value to your role in JCs. And it's also my desire that JCs will grow leaders who are emotionally intelligent. Thank you so much again for inviting me in our session today, and it has been my pleasure to talk to everybody. Do you have any questions, or do we have any clarifications about emotional intelligence, Jinx? Did you capture anything from our chat box? And I'm so sorry, guys, if I talked so fast. I really tried to cover all of the things that I need to cover, but hopefully I was able to clearly explain it to everybody. Thank you. Jinx?
Okay, thanks, Josh. I think Jinx is on mute. So can we request Veeps or Director Daryl to unmute?
All right. So yes, thank you so much, Josh. There's just a simple technical glitch, but yes, thank you so much, Josh, for that very insightful and I believe a very engaging talk on emotional intelligence and leadership. If I've been observing the chat box for a while, and everyone's really engaged. Everyone really has a piece to say, and there are a lot of takeaways to get from your talk. And I'm pretty sure that our participants would still have a lot of questions to ask. And I hope that you will all of the lessons that our participants were able to get will be able to apply to their respective daily lives and their organizations. At this point, in the interest of time, we'll entertain at least 2 questions from the chat group. So if you have that burning question for Josh, please drop it now in the chat box, and then we'll randomly choose at least 2 questions for Josh, just to keep the engagement going, since everyone's very passionate about asking. So we have this first question from Solitaire Chapman. Josh, what kind of specific mindfulness do you do in the morning?
Oh gosh, hi Solitaire. Thank you for joining us. So a specific kind of mindfulness. It's nothing really fancy. Like what I mentioned earlier, the mindfulness activity that I do it before my prayer in the morning. So what I do is I just take, conscious breathing. I just take conscious breathing, and usually that's 3 long deep breaths. All right, the kind of breathing. All right, the kind of breathing that I would feel from my back and from my heart. All right, it's a long deep breath just for me to center myself, and after those long 3 deep breaths, I would begin with my morning prayer. Aside from that, also Solitaire, I also dedicate a time of my day for silence. And that's also another mindfulness activity that I do, and perhaps I can also share to our participants, Jinx, no? Na allocate a time in your day for silence, whatever that activity is. For my end, it's the time of the day wherein I would make my own coffee in the morning. And RS is actually very correct earlier also that meditation is not always about having your eyes closed, right? And doing that yoga pose. It's not really always like that. Meditation is really all about giving yourself that time for silence, and a sacred time wherein you dedicate it for centering yourself, visualizing as to what you want to achieve for the rest of the day, how you would want to project yourself in your daily interactions, and etc. That's just what I do. Nothing really fancy.
All right. From mindfulness, we have another question from JCI Bacolod member. what's this? What's her name? It's too long, but okay, but the question goes, what kind of coping mechanism do you use when your emotional triggers would turn on?
Actually, Jinx, that's a very good question. And from my end, because I believe that it has become second to my nature. It has become part of my DNA, wherein when I'm confronted with a difficult situation or a stressful situation, I already know how to handle it. But you know what? Interestingly, very interestingly, the things that would usually surprise me are those little things. Are those little things. I'll give you guys an example, all right? I'll use an example. I'm always prepared, say for because in my role in the organization, I'm always tasked to solve problems. All right, I'm always tasked to solve problems, which means that that's how I'm wired in the organization. But there are those little things. Let's say, for example, I had this class last week, Jinx. I had this class. It's a 2-hour class. All right, it's a 2-hour class. But apparently, when I sent the meeting invitation to the participants, I was not able to adjust the time. Instead of a 2-hour class, what I scheduled was just a 30-minute class. And can you imagine, there is a 1 hour and 30 minutes discrepancy. So while I was setting the expectations of the participants, I told the participants that this class is going to run for 2 hours. And the participants began chatting, all right? Began chatting that, Josh, in the meeting invitation, it's just 30 minutes. Those little surprises. And I'm sure that in our day-to-day lives, it's those little surprises, right? That would usually sway us. So what's my coping mechanism? My coping mechanism is just to focus on what is going on at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Just to focus
very well.
on.
Yeah, very well, Josh. I totally agree. Right. Remember, as you mentioned earlier, while we were crunching around time, and then there's still a lot of topics or lot of insights are still about to share, and we're just as you said, we're just in the moment right now because all of our participants right now are pretty much engaged. They really wanted to hear more, so a little extension of the time for you is not really a problem at all.
No, I mean, I'm totally fine, Jinx, with extending. I'm just also thinking about our participants tonight. And I'm just also so happy to hear that they're fine extending. So yeah, I'm fine with that.
All right. So in as much as you'd want to hear from Josh, more about Josh and whatever he does, and a lot of more questions in the chat box, I believe, for the interest of time, that's it for the first session about emotional intelligence and leadership as part of our theme, empowering volunteers in this Recharge the JCI Cebu Do Good series. And once again, we'd like to say our thank you and send our virtual applause to Josh Eballe for gracing us his time for tonight.